Okay, alright. Selamat pagi, good morning. Before I start, I'd like to thank MTIB, the Director General, Haji Dr. Muhammad Zamri, and the team at the Marketing Division for inviting us to share the work and the research that we have been doing on ESG for a couple of years. Okay. I also like to thank Mr. Stephen for having set the platform right so that I can skip some of the slides that I've prepared. So that makes the talk coherent with what he has said, because he is coming from a so-called a practitioner's viewpoint. But I'm going to take a research perspective. Now, the idea with research is you have to be ahead of the wave, you see. So a lot of what we have been doing is trying to see what actual implications ESG will actually have on the wood industry. So that's essentially the scope of the work that is ongoing in UPM. Next, please. Okay, a brief outline. There'll be a short introduction, some historical perspective, some metrics and methodology. I think very important thing, carbon as a currency, because everywhere, everyone is talking carbon as a currency. Then we'll get into the ESG scope for the wood industry. And I will also briefly touch on the ESG, the research program that's ongoing in UPM. Next, please. Next, yeah. Okay, I think we have heard a very good introduction and a background to what ESG is. Now, I'd just like to pick on what Mr. Stephen has highlighted. Now, it's essentially about reporting. But the question for the wood industry is, what do you want to report? Where is your data? I think all of us are in the wood industry. One of the single biggest problems in the wood industry is data is limited. Okay, I think in my years in the furniture business, I know how to do the furniture, but how much wood dust is actually generated when I produce a single chair, I do not know. How much kilowatt hours is actually used in the dust extraction system in a particular factory, that's unknown. So these are all contributing to where we are moving towards ESG. And the next point I like to pick up from Mr. Stephen's presentation is when he highlighted that it's an opportunity to change. I would like to add change and transform, because if you do not transform this industry, which is traditionally known as a 3D industry, it is dirty, it is dangerous, and it is difficult. And if you want to make the transformation, then you have to make data available. And that's the basis on which ESG is actually built, because without the data, you literally got very little to report. Okay, next please. Okay, next, yeah. Okay, why you consider? I think the first is because 91% of most people think that you are actually responding to evolving regulation and legal requirements. I think in the timber industry, we have seen a fair share of new regulations coming. That I will get into detail later. Then you have to manage risk, Now, especially those of you who have been following the EUDR, the new European Union deregulation, deforestation regulation, you will see that, okay, you have to manage the risk. Then, of course, you can have your advisors, then there are demand from members, policy holders, and perhaps some are following the peer influence. Next, please. So this is just to capture, I think it's much similar to what Mr. Stephen has mentioned. Next, please. Okay. So the environmental, social, governance, three major elements. Next, please. Now, benefits of compliance. I think the point I like to highlight here is we are, especially the timber industry, we are very much an export-oriented country. So when you are exporting, then compliance to global market requirement is very crucial. So you may not get the price premium for compliant products as it is. But what ESG does is it gives you market access. That's very, very important. And we have a problem because the single most expenditure for most companies is looking for markets. Yeah, everyone is trying to look for new markets. And then you end up everybody going to the same market. Okay, all right, next please. Okay, some historical perspective. I think as what mentioned by Mr. Stephen, okay, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. Next, please. This is what they are. So there's 17 of it. It covers all aspects. Next. Now, I think what is important is, now SDG has got a political economy perspective to it. Now, I can impose certain pro-poor regulations and policy to support certain segment of the market. Now, that fits very well with SGD because it is embedded in the SDG itself. Okay, so it is a valid option for influencing the availability, accessibility, affordability, and quality of goods and services that are essential for social development of the poor. Okay, next. So ESG worldwide, we have the research report worldwide is showing that it's a mixed bag. Not all companies are finding that being ESG compliant contributes to your bottom line. But generally they all agree that it is more for the capital markets. Essentially to open up doors for you to make yourself accessible to funds. So if you are in the public sphere and looking for public funding, then obviously ESG will be highly attractive to you. Next, please. Okay, I think we have to be clear between ESG and CSR. Now, the CSR is a company's commitment to the community and environment where they allocate the resources through voluntary activities and donation. Voluntary. The key word is CSR is a voluntary activity. Okay. Next, please. Okay, so this is the difference between the CSR and the ESG. All right. So essentially, ESG brings about the ability to unlock competitive values. And you can build trust among your stakeholders, especially your investors and customers. Next. Okay. This is ESG, CSR, and versus sustainability. So if you are moving towards a sustainable company, then obviously CSR and ESG must be part and parcel of your company policy and your vision. Yeah, next. So metrics. So what do we actually measure? So we have the greenhouse gas emission, extreme weather, sensitivity to water, waste pollution, land use, biodiversity, human capital, consumer preference, demographic changes, safety management, social cohesion. Okay, these are the metrics. you can see that it's very much tied to the changing your processes in one way or another. It's no longer status quo or doing business as usual, because you have to make some tangible changes. Next. Again, it demonstrates what needs to be done. There is, of course, you see the key word being repeated here is there are some cost elements, either direct or indirect when you make these changes. Next. Now, what is the challenges to reporting? As what highlighted by Mr. Stephen, there is no single framework. Okay, so you have to be very specific about you are preparing the sustainability report for who. Next. We have evolving ESG regulations because globally the standards are changing. So you have to be aware. I think this is where the research entities are very important because you have to be ahead of the wave. You have to be able to filter what's oncoming, and then you have to bring about a trickle-down effect to the industry at large. Third is, of course, complex data management. Because you need data, because if you don't have data, it's very difficult to report. And of course, you need to understand and manage and quantify the ESG risk. Okay? So, and finally, you can use your ESG performance to improve business. You can have your cake and eat it too. Now, I think our experience with some industries, if you are able to even bring about a small change in the number of cutter marks on the surface of a molded wood, you can change the amount of dust that you produce for your system to extract. And if the volume of dust per hour basis changes, you eventually end up using less energy. And that translates into some form of cost advantage. So there are data that is actually available looking at how do you optimize the operation. But it means that you have to know, for a start, how many cutter marks are you doing on your factory shop floor. But unfortunately, I think the problem is the word cutter mark itself is usually not very well understood on most shop floors. So then you have a problem. Okay, so it is important. So in reality, ESG data is no different than sales and marketing data. How can you quantify the impact of word of mouth? Okay, both marketing ESG impacts can be elusive, yet they have incredible influence on the bottom line. Okay, so it makes the company agile, automate, control, validate, measure, and positively impact the business. Next, please. So, what to measure? Next. So we measure the risk, the various elements. You have to be aware of the acts, the regulations, and so forth. Yes. Next. Okay, so the measurement tools, we can have ratings, we have index, we have audits, we can do a simple questionnaire, we have some ESG software that's available. Next. Okay, the scores here, we are looking at the different aspects where you work out the score for the company. Next. Okay, this is just to illustrate how we build up the scoring and the rating system. Next. 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 Then you can set up what's your score looking like. Next. The reporting, the format of the reporting. Okay, next. And this is essentially how you would rate. So this is what you get. In very simple terms, if you are in the blue, you are a leader. That means you are you are a very sustainable company. But if you are in the red, then you are lagging in the standard practice. Okay. So, but before you can reach this, you have to have the data, right? So that is the challenge. Yeah, next. Okay, so why ESG is important? I think peer comparison, very important. Benchmarking, where do you stand? And of course, investor attraction. These are the three main points. Next. So ESG scope for the wood industry. Next. Okay, so greenhouse energy consumption, waste effluent, labor issues, health and safety, product life cycle, supply chain, certified material, human rights, corporate governance, and anti-corruption. Next. Okay. Among the notable legislation that came into strict enforcement recently, so we have the Environmental Quality Act, Employment Minimum Standard for Housing, Accommodation Amenities, you have the Renewable Energy Act, Clean Air Regulation, Employment Amendments, and many more on its way. So you have to be prepared lah, because more regulations will come on stream. Yeah, next. Okay. So the general criteria for ESG compliance, the survey that UPM conducted, now these are the primary criteria, the secondary criteria. Okay. So if you see each of these, can we go back to the, yeah. If you see each of these, then the first level is we are just trying to assess whether the industry complies with the existing regulations. That's all. Okay. Whether you have anything in plan. So ESG in the wood industry, of course, deforestation, I think Mr. Stephen highlighted this. Energy, water consumption, dust emission, the 3D job certification, Aboriginal rights, child labor, and things like that. Another important point is, of course, the use of timber in construction, because that's important, because timber is a green material. Okay, it's carbon neutral, very environmental friendly. Next, please. Okay, some figures that we have captured. Now, sawn timber, this is just to show the carbon footprint for different wood products in kilograms per carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay, flooring, OSB, plywood, MDF, particle board, sawn timber. This is just some of the work that has been ongoing. Yeah, next. Okay, I think the key is it should not be greenwashing. Everybody says, yeah, I'm doing this, but in actual fact, that's not the case. Okay. Now, globally, there is a lot of research in greenwashing. So, if you look at the research work that is being published now, there is a lot of this on greenwashing. And it is not only about related to SMEs, but a lot of the large so-called branded companies are also subjected to this, because a lot of them claim that they are doing certain things, but that's not the case. Next, please. So ESG, the research program. Yeah, so I have my students here. Mr. Lim there and Hazira is there. Okay, next. So the degree of compliance of various factors of requirement under the three broad categorical requirements of ESG in the Malaysian wood industry. Okay, next. Okay, this is just to share with you some of the findings that we have got. So looking at environmental, social, and governance. This was the activities that were actually the criteria that were evaluated in the study. Next. The present level of selective compliance of ESG metrics. Surprisingly, there is a lot of environmental criteria. And governance criteria comes second. Third is social. Okay. Next. So level of adoption of environmental metrics. So use of certified and legal materials. Now NTCS, PFC, FSC, and so forth. Okay. Now waste management. emission standard compliance, use of recycled packaging, that is relatively low. Carbon footprint assessment is relatively low. And of course, an overall greenhouse gas emission reduction policy is literally not in place. Next, please. The level of adoption of social metrics. Okay. Compliance to occupational safety and health requirements, minimum wage compliance, human rights policy. Okay. Compliance with the minimum standard for housing and amenities. Next. Level of adoption of governance metrics, the CSR activities, adoption of corporate governance among public listed companies, adoption of corporate governance among non-public listed companies. So the determining factors that affected the adoption of ESG metrics among the respondents. Okay, number one is a market requirement. Two, it's a legislative requirement. So this is not something that people wake up one morning and say, okay, let's do ESG. So I think the trickle-down effect is you need a strong policy. Okay? So either the market will force you to change, or the legislative arm will come after you. Okay? And I think you can see the sequence of new acts that are being introduced. So one after another, so you will have to make these changes. So corporate identity, best practices, and of course, new entrants. So a lot of people say, yeah, I'm new to this, let me get my factory. So then it raises the question, how new is new? How long do you want to be new? Okay. Ideally, you would have thought a new entrant would actually have very high compliance. Why? Because you have state-of-the-art technology, right? Ideally, your machines are going to be much more efficient, right? But in fact, it is the opposite. So it is something to think about. All right, next. Okay, the reasons for non-adoption of ESG criteria. So the first one is lack of awareness. So I think MTIB is doing an excellent job because this is basically creating awareness. You are not going to go back to your factory and say, okay, we will start ESG today. No, that's not going to happen. At least maybe when you are driving back, you will think about it. These guys were talking about ESG, okay. There's no direct benefits. I agree. Because if you don't see what is the implication to your bottom line, why bother, Because there is no act. There is no enforcement agency coming and checking that, hey, do you have a sustainability report? So why bother, okay? Prohibitive cost, this is standard. Too expensive. Lack of knowledge worker, inconsistent policy, no ESG compliant peers. Who else is doing it? People want to know. Who else is doing it? Then there is the organizational resistance. And of course, I'm an SME. I'm a micro company. So, correct. Next, please. So, conclusion, generally, the large size companies, they are more receptive, partly because Bursa is coming after them and their investors are requiring. So, within the Malaysian wood product and furniture industries, the level of compliance increases in the order of environmental governance and social. The primary reason cited for the adoption of environmental, social, and governance by respondents were market demand and legislative needs, which means you need both of these requirements and it must be in tandem. Next. So the results of this study is based on a survey of a limited sample size and it may not reflect the overall industry status. One thing was very interesting. 93% of all participants did not realize that their prevailing activities and tasks actually fell into the overall ESG metrics. people are somewhat doing something like, they comply certain things, but they are not aware this is ESG. So it is very important because it is by default, not by design. That means awareness is very, very crucial. Awareness is very, very crucial. The prevailing level of awareness of ESG requirement is relatively low, which necessitates greater training and information dissemination for greater uptake and adoption. Selective compliance of some ESG criteria appears to be driven by the law and regulation rather than market requirement. Now, why is this important in the timber sector? Because when you are an exporter, you can choose which market you want to go to. So if you are not exporting into Europe, then most people don't bother about EUDR. If you are exporting to South Africa, or if you are exporting to the Middle East, then it is not a problem. So I think you have to take this into cognizance that it is the market forces and the legal requirements that will go hand in hand. Okay, next. Okay, this is the paper. You can get access to this. Next. So the ongoing work is a measurement of ESG compliance and carbon footprint, evaluation of selected wood products. Now, the idea of this work is we are hoping that UPM will make a long-lasting impact, because carbon is seen as the currency of the future. So if you do not know what is your carbon footprint in the products that you produce, then I think eventually there are already buyers in Europe that require you to publish your carbon footprint for the products that you are exporting. So eventually this will come. Okay. Next. All right. Thank you very much. And I'll be happy to talk to any of you who are interested in the work that we do in UPM. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih diucapkan kepada Yang Berusaha Prof. Dr. Jegatheswaran di atas pembentangan ESG in Timber Industry yang disampaikan sebentar tadi. Penerimaan amalan ESG ini merupakan laluan untuk mengubah industri produk kayu dan perabot daripada industri bergaji rendah, kotor, berbahaya dan sukar kepada industri yang mampan, menyediakan pekerjaan yang saksama dan hijau selaras dengan konsep circular economy bagi mencapai Sustainable Development Goals. Untuk makluman, Prof. Dr. Jega juga telah mengedarkan soalan kaji sidik mengenai ESG di meja peserta. Dimohon para hadirin untuk menjawab kaji selidik tersebut dan diserahkan semula sebelum makan tengah hari di meja pendaftaran. Hadirin sekalian, seminar pagi ini akan diteruskan lagi dengan pembentangan yang ketiga pada hari ini. Dengan sukacitanya, majlis menjemput Yang Berusaha Prof. Dr. Zakir Ahmad, pensyarah kanan Universiti Teknologi Merayu ITM. Untuk makluman, pembentangan ini akan turut dibentangkan bersama oleh Encik Muhammad Hilmi Syamsuri, penolong pengarah kanan bahagian pembangunan industri MTIB yang turut terlibat dalam penyelidikan penggunaan kayu sebagai bahan binaan. Para hadirin sekalian, Yang Berusaha Prof. Dr. Zakir Ahmad berkelulusan Dr. Falsafah dalam bidang kejuruteraan kayu dari University of Bath, United Kingdom. Beliau telah berkhidmat di UiTM selama 24 tahun. Kepakaran beliau adalah dalam bidang timber engineering, timber and adhesive composite, wood fiber cement composite and glue-in rod. Sepanjang perkhidmatan, beliau telah menilai lebih 65 orang pelajar PhD dan ijazah sarjana serta lebih 100 orang pelajar ijazah sarjana muda. Encik Muhammad Hilmi pula adalah seorang graduan Universiti Teknologi Malaysia UTM berkelulusan ijazah dalam bidang kejuruteraan mekanikal. Beliau mempunyai pengalaman selama 13 tahun dengan MTIB dan kini ditempatkan di bahagian pembangunan industri yang memberi tumpuan kepada kejuruteraan kayu dan pembinaan. Tanpa melengahkan masa, dipersilakan Encik Muhammad Hilmi bin Syamsuri dan Profesor Dr. Zaki Ahmad bagi pembentangan yang bertajuk Usage of Timber in Construction Industry. Dipersilakan.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Moderator. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good morning to everyone. So I will continue as a third speaker. I will be quick because I'm sharing slot with Prof. Zakia. So Prof, 10 minutes for me. Okay, okay, all right. So I will continue the timber usage in construction. Okay. Okay. So okay, when we talk about timber, several questions will pop up in our minds. Is it safe to use timber? Is it expensive to buy timber? Is it timber? Is it durable to use timber? And what if timber catch on fire? So many perception, so many uncertainties toward using timber in construction industry. So what is the main issues of timber? Yes, of course, this is shrinkage and swelling. Timber tends to condensation if not insulated well. And also the main issue here is catch on fire. So the question is, can timber catch on fire? So why timber? Temperature for pilot ignition of timber